Well, getting back to that conversation we started earlier with Professor Somadoda Fikeni in our Pretoria studios, and we're looking at, the various scenarios and where South Africa finds itself currently, and a question that many of the leaders will be mulling over will be, where will this country be in 2030? And just to get back to Professor in terms of where we find ourselves right now, Prof, during the traffic update there with Rob Byrne, we saw once again service delivery protests all over the show. A main artery like the N3 South to Durban closed. And this obviously will have serious repercussions for the economy of this country. So take us once again on that giraffe projection and tell us what exactly is going on. What are we missing here as a country?
In the first instance, I do think that increasingly we are becoming a protest nation where protests are beginning to compete with the weather report, with traffic report. And I'm sure the media might be wise to even have protest reports on daily basis given the current situation. But the underlying issues here are that the issue of inequality and general failure to address socio-economic transformation issues, which were the promises of our democracy, in face of the economic crisis, in face of the rising cost of living, and the real or perceived corruption. All those combined, not only from the side of government, but also the corporate sector, the civil society, do create a sense of frustration in a society that has become one of the most unequal in the world. Therefore, those at the bottom of the socio-economic ladder, they see the top getting disproportionately all the resources and everything that they think should be shared in an equitable manner. So to that extent, you do have a perception that the country is relatively wealthy, but the money is everywhere except where it is most needed.
Do we have a leadership that is decisive and bold enough to actually pull us out of this morass that we're currently in? And I'm not just talking about government. You mentioned, the private sector, civil society, across the board. Do we have the right leadership, or do we have at least the capability to find the right leaders?
The Indlulamithi Scenarios 2030 has reflected that the engagements with various opinion leaders, with various stakeholders, and the research work that has gone there indicate that we have a generalized weakness in terms of institutional capacities in the public sector, in the private sector, in the civil society, but also a leadership crisis right across. And organizations are actually fragmented, they are fractured, and sometimes they are more involved in the infighting, trying to resolve their internal issues. So they cannot have a clear vision into the future when they are too fixated with navel gazing.
So how do we move ahead, Prof? Because people are caught up in the smog. They can't see beyond their immediate frustration at the moment, it would seem. So how does leadership then ensure that we actually find our way forward?
I do think that the Indlulamithi South Africa Scenarios 2030 provides a platform for strategic reflection about our futures. Because for now we've been way too obsessed with the here and now, obsessed with the headlines, obsessed with the next elections, with the next parliamentary debate, obsessed with the next scandal. And this particular exercise of scenarios is saying, in a matter of 12 years, let's begin to reflect as to where the nation is heading. And by providing scenarios, it is saying, should we take a particular route, we would know that we are going for the worst case scenario. Should we take certain steps, we will be going for a particular improvement, but the challenges are quite immense. They can no longer be resolved by government alone. or even by business alone, or by this or that political party. They need the whole nation to put its shoulder on the wagon.
But just a final question. How will these leaders do that if we haven't defined a common national interest as yet?
Sometimes when you refocus a country which is going through many challenges or a crisis in some instances, leaders, even the most unlikely and unexpected leaders, do rise and respond to our date with destiny. And it is in that context that people think out of the box, because for now, we have been condemned of doing things the same way that has not yielded results. And to give you an example, our obsession with 1%, 2% growth in our economy is something we often celebrate, and yet it has not yielded the results. You need to rethink the strategy. At times you do have growth, which is not inclusive, which is not people-centered, which simply lift the top 1% to get more and more of the benefits of that growth. So it needs a different mindset, a different reset button or reboot button for the societal leaders and the members of the society as such, because a sense of self-reliance where people take the ownership in the crafting of the destiny is very important, rather than over-reliance on messianic leaders or over-reliance on government.
Prof, thank you so much for stopping by this morning. Professor Somadoda Fikeni. And of course, very important scenario planning will be taking place tonight at the Indlulamithi Scenario Planning Summit. And we will perhaps tell you tomorrow what came out of that. But let's go to a short spot break.